Jack and Death. It was starting to get dark, and the waves were crashing against the shore, angrily. But even more angry was Jack's heart. And Jack was walking along the shoreline, kicking at any seashells and kicking at rocks and kicking at everything. He was angry. He was angry because he didn't want to admit that he was really sad. And as the wind from the sea and the salty spray hit his face, he kicked even harder because he didn't want to admit that that salty water on his cheeks were tears. You see, his mother was so sick, so terribly sick and in so much pain, and he couldn't bear to see her suffer. And he knew that she was going to die, and he couldn't stand it. And so he'd run out of the house because he didn't want to be there when it happened. Well, he kicked something again and suddenly heard somebody say, "Ow." Jack looked up and saw this great big figure with a long black cloak and a hood that came down over its eyes. "Well, you were in my way," said Jack. Said the figure. "Now, do you know where Mrs. Miller lives?" the figure asked. "Mrs. Miller," said Jack. That was his mother. "Who wants to know?" said Jack. "Death," said the figure simply. Jack knew it. He knew it. He knew it. Death was coming for his mother. "Well," said Jack, "I don't believe you. You don't look like Death. How do I know you're Death?" Well, Death looked to him quite offended. "What do you mean? Of course I look like Death. Look at my cloak." "Anyone can wear a cloak," said Jack. His mind was turning so quickly, thinking, I need to distract him somehow. What do I need to do? I can't let him go to my mom. "Yeah, I don't believe you. Anybody can wear a cloak." "Well, can anybody do this?" said Death. And Death started growing and growing and growing and growing so tall that he seemed to blot out the clouds. Jack looked up at Death, feeling tiny next to him. "Yeah," said Jack. "Any sort of wizard can make himself bigger. But Death always sneaks up on people unawares. Death comes silently, quietly. Death is so small, it could fit into my pocket. In fact, Death is so small it could fit into this little jar here. This little piece of glass, this trash that somebody threw. Yeah, look, this little jar. Death is so sneaky that he could fit inside this tiny little jar." "Well," said Death, "that's easy enough," and shrank down so small that he fit inside the little jar that Jack had picked up from the beach. "Ha!" said Jack, quickly covering up the jar. Now you won't be able to take my mom." And he stuck the jar in his pocket. He raced back home. He burst open the door. He had been afraid earlier to go back, thinking that he wouldn't find his mom, but now he knew that Death hadn't gotten to her. And sure enough, his mother was still alive. Now, she looked pretty bad, let's be honest. She was in bed, she was very weak, and she was coughing terribly, and each cough hurt her. But she was still alive, and she wasn't going to die anytime soon. "Mom," said Jack, hugging her tightly. "Mom, you're going to be okay. I know it. You're going to be okay." "I don't think so, Jack," said his mother. "No, yes you will. Yes you will. And I can't tell you why, but I know you're going to be okay. And just a minute, I'm going to make you some chicken soup. I know you love chicken soup, and that's really good to make people get better again. So just a minute. And he raced out into the garden, and he caught the biggest, fattest chicken, and he felt bad about it, but I mean, his mother was more important. Now the chicken was and he started trying to break that chicken's neck. But it was as if the chicken were made out of rubber. The head just stayed right back on, and the chicken said and ran off. Well, Jack chased after that chicken, jumped on it, and he got a great big knife and tried to chop the head off. Knife bounced right off, and the chicken glared at him and scurried away. Well, Jack suddenly thought, and he pulled the little jar with death out of his pocket. Oh. Well, I guess we're vegetarian now. He put the jar back in his pocket and went to the garden to pull out a carrot. The carrot would not come out of the ground. It just wouldn't. It was as if the carrot was holding on, and Jack kept pulling. And Jack thought, well, I guess we're eating cereal. And so he went to the kitchen and pulled out the cereal and some of the food that was already prepared in the kitchen, and he gave it to his mother. She only ate a few bites and said, I can't. And so Jack ate a few more bites, but then he looked back at the kitchen and realized there wasn't that much food left that was already ready. Well, he said, I guess we're going to go hungry for a little while. But it didn't matter. His mother was okay. She was going to be okay. She was. Wasn't she? But that night, once again, his mother was not able to sleep because her coughing kept her up all night, and it hurt so bad. And Jack held her hand, and he brought in more blankets, and he gave her water. And the next day, he tried to give her a little bit more food from what was left in the kitchen, and over the next few days, they ran out of that food. And the chickens were still running around, and the garden was still doing great, but nothing would happen. But every day, his mother wasn't getting better. She wasn't getting better at all. And one night, finally, she kept on coughing and coughing and coughing. And she said, Jack, you've done something, haven't you? Mothers always know. They always seem to know. And Jack was feeling guilty by now, because he saw how much pain she was in and how much she was suffering. And he knew that he was keeping death trapped in his pocket, and he felt guilty and he couldn't meet her eyes. Jack, she said, what have you done? And finally, he pulled out the little jar and showed it to her. And death glaring at them from inside the jar. Oh, sweetie, she said, sweetie. I know you don't want to hear this, and I wish it were different. I wish I could be there for you. But it's time. You're going to be okay. Let me go. Jack started to cry this time. He didn't feel angry anymore. He'd already spent all that anger and found what was underneath, which was a deep, deep grief. And he didn't tell himself that the salty water on his face was from the ocean. He admitted it was tears. And carefully, he unscrewed the little bottle. Death came out of the bottle and took his full form and sat down by the side of the bed. And Death looked at Jack in the eyes. I'm not the enemy, kid. I know. Death smiled at Jack's mom, took her hand, and left. Jack left his house, closed the door, and went back to the side of the sea and walked along, not kicking anything, not doing much at all. But then he looked up, and there was Death, standing there. "I'm not the enemy, kid," Death said. "Come, let me teach you how to live."